They didn't find the money in the walls. They didn't find it in the floors. They found it buried 6 feet down in the courtyard of a $40 million Miami Beach estate, sealed inside waterproof military-grade steel cases, vacuum-packed and stacked like the vault of a ghost bank that never existed on paper. $50 million. Cash. Hidden in the ground like a secret only the earth was supposed to keep, and they almost missed it. Here is what federal investigators discovered when they finally broke through the outer shell of one of the most sophisticated shadow laundering operations ever constructed on American soil. We are talking about a criminal financial architecture spanning 14 countries, 19 shell corporations, 6 ghost nonprofit foundations, and one man at the center of all of it who, until 72 hours before the raid, was being considered for a humanitarian award by a civic organization he himself had secretly funded. This is the story of how the coastal import syndicate embedded itself into the financial bloodstream of South Florida. And the next part is worse than you think. 3:47 a.m. Miami Beach, Florida. The ocean is quiet at this hour, the kind of quiet that feels wrong on a street where the houses cost more than most people will earn in 3 lifetimes. Palm trees barely move. The air is thick with salt and humidity. Down on the waterfront boulevard, the only light comes from the security fixtures mounted on the perimeter walls of a compound so large it has its own internal road system. They come in without sirens. 4 FBI tactical vehicles roll dark down the service lane on the northern side of the estate. 2 Dia strike units hold the southern breach points. ICE agents in full tactical gear have already sealed every exit from the compound walls to the private dock at the water's edge. Overhead, 2 DA's surveillance helicopters run without spotlights, tracking heat signatures from above, feeding real-time thermal data to a command unit parked 2 blocks away inside a retrofitted communications trailer. This is Operation Tidal Ledger. And tonight, it does not announce itself. At exactly 3:51 a.m., the breach begins. Flashbangs detonate at the eastern gate. The sound is massive and immediate, a concussive crack that rolls across the water. Federal agents in black move through the smoke like they rehearsed this 100 times, because they did. The front door of the main residence comes off its hinges in under 4 seconds. Inside, a private security detail of 6 men, all armed, all licensed on paper, none of them prepared for the speed and coordination of what just entered the building, are taken to the ground in the entrance corridor before they can reach their radios. In the master suite, on the 4th floor of a residence that has an elevator and a climate-controlled wine cellar and a private panic room with biometric locks, a man named Ronaldo Esteva Cruz wakes up to the sound of federal agents already on his floor. Cruz, 53 years old, publicly known as the founder of 3 legitimate marine logistics companies, a real estate development group operating across Brickell and the Keys, and a charitable trust that had donated money to children's hospitals and hurricane relief funds. On paper, Ronaldo Cruz was exactly the kind of Miami success story that gets profiled in regional business magazines. Private jets, a catamaran registered in the Cayman Islands, a wife who sat on the board of a Florida arts foundation. Off paper, federal investigators would later conclude Cruz was the operating architect of the coastal import syndicate's entire Western Atlantic financial corridor, a shadow laundering mastermind who had spent 11 years quietly turning South Florida into the syndicate's most protected and most profitable hub on the North American continent. He is arrested before he reaches the panic room. His phone, still warm, is bagged as evidence. His encrypted satellite tablet, found open on the nightstand, would take federal cyber analysts 48 hours to partially crack. What they find inside that tablet is the reason this operation escalates from a financial crime seizure to a national security emergency. But that comes later. On the lower floors, agents move through rooms that look like galleries. Sculptures. Rare art. Wall installations that federal appraisers will later estimate at over $8 million in total value, much of it acquired through auction houses, used as layering vehicles for dirty money. In a basement corridor behind a mechanical room, a steel door is found welded shut and recently painted over to match the surrounding concrete. Behind it, federal agents find a server room. Active. Running. Encrypted. 3 racks of hardware humming in the dark, connected to a private fiber line that bypasses the public network entirely. One of the lead cyber analysts on site looks at the setup for a long moment before saying quietly into his radio, that this is not a backup system. This is a command infrastructure. They pull the drives, they seal the room. And then, just before dawn, a ground-penetrating radar unit sweeps the courtyard. That is when they find the cases. $50 million in vacuum-sealed currency, buried 6 feet below a decorative stone patio. Mixed denominations. Multiple currencies. Serial number ranges that Federal Treasury analysts will spend weeks tracing backward through 15 years of ghost transactions. The agents who unearthed the first case stand there for a moment without speaking. Then the lead field supervisor radios the command unit and says, simply, "We are going to need more bags." 41 miles southwest. 4:20 a.m. The Florida Keys. The second raid team hits 3 separate properties within a 12-minute window. A private fishing lodge on a mangrove-shielded inlet, a converted boathouse registered to a marine equipment rental company, and a waterfront rental property in the name of a Delaware LLC that traces back through 6 layers of corporate abstraction to a holding entity in Luxembourg that exists only as a registered address above a dry cleaning business. At the fishing lodge, federal agents find 200 kilograms of cocaine sealed in industrial vacuum packs and stored inside refrigerated bait coolers. They also find a concealed dock access hatch beneath the main floor, leading to a submersible docking channel designed to receive delivery vessels below the waterline, invisible from the surface, invisible from the air. At the boathouse, they find methamphetamine, 43 kilograms staged for transport, alongside marine fuel manifests that have been falsified to show cargo weights consistent with equipment rental shipments. At the rental property, they find something more unsettling than drugs. They find people. 11 individuals. Migrants, 3 of them minors, held in interior rooms with the windows painted black. Federal agents call for medical units immediately. ICE investigators document the location as a human trafficking transit house, a stopping point inside a larger smuggling corridor that the coastal import syndicate had been operating through the Keys waterway system for at least 4 years. This is not just a drug network. This is an infrastructure, and someone built it deliberately. 9:14 a.m. FBI Miami Field Office. Cyber Forensics Division. The seized drives from the Cruz estate are already being processed by the time the morning briefing begins. The server farm in Cruz's basement was running a custom encrypted communication platform, something built from modified commercial architecture but substantially altered, investigators note, by someone with deep technical expertise. Within 6 hours of initial analysis, federal analysts crack the outer encryption shell and begin reconstructing what they will internally designate as the network diagram for an operation called, in its own coded internal files, Project Shoreline Command. What appears on the screen stops the room. The diagram is not a simple distribution chain. It is a layered financial and logistics web connecting over 47 entities across 14 countries. Shell companies in Panama and the British Virgin Islands funnel revenue streams from narcotics shipments into real estate holding groups in Florida and Georgia. A sham green infrastructure nonprofit receives grant money from a state environmental fund, money that has been cycled through 2 separate charitable fronts before arriving. Restaurant chains across Broward and Miami-Dade counties serve as cash-intensive businesses used to commingle drug proceeds with legitimate revenue. A private marine logistics company, the same company listed as Cruz's primary legitimate business, has shipping manifests altered to undercount cargo weights on vessels entering through the port of Miami. Federal trade investigators will later determine that the alteration system was sophisticated enough to have passed standard customs review without detection for at least 7 years. And then the analysts reach the deepest layer of the Shoreline Command files. There is a second set of authorization keys embedded in the architecture. Keys that do not belong to Cruz. Keys that are linked to a separate encrypted communication channel, one that has never passed through any server Cruz directly controlled. These keys trace back through 3 relay nodes to a communication device registered to a shell identity in the name of an official, a man known in the files only as the regional architect. Investigators begin pulling on that thread. And what unravels is not just corruption. What unravels is command-level collusion. The regional architect, whose real identity federal investigators are still working to confirm at the time of this briefing, had been providing the coastal import syndicate with advance intelligence on federal enforcement schedules, port inspection windows, and interagency coordination timelines for at least 3 years. This is not negligence. This is engineered treason. And the operation, federal supervisors confirm in that briefing room, has only just begun. 5:50 a.m. The following morning, Joint Operations Command Center, Miami Federal Building. The digital map covering the central display wall is covered in red markers, 43 of them, pulsing across Miami-Dade, Broward, Monroe, and Palm Beach counties. Each marker represents a confirmed node in the Coastal Import Syndicate's Florida network. Distribution houses, money collection points, transit corridors. A hidden drug superlab discovered inside a decommissioned commercial refrigeration facility in northwest Miami-Dade that federal chemists confirm was producing pharmaceutical-grade synthetic narcotics at a scale equivalent to small industrial manufacturing. Over 1,200 federal agents are now coordinated under Operation Tidal Ledger. FBI, DIA, ICE, SWAT teams from 4 regional task forces, 2 Coast Guard interceptor units operating offshore, a U.S. Army support element providing logistics and communications infrastructure at the command level. Black Hawk helicopters from a DH aviation unit circle the outer perimeter zones as ground teams move on target after target in synchronized waves. The coordinator at the front of the room looks at the map and announces the morning's objective in a single sentence. Every red marker goes dark before sunset. What follows over the next 6 hours is the most comprehensive federal takedown operation in South Florida in modern memory. A cartel distribution fortress in a gated community in Coral Gables is hit at dawn. The property, registered to a real estate trust connected through 4 corporate layers to Cruz's holding group, contains over $2 million in processed cash, 1,100 kilograms of cocaine, and what appears to be a dedicated communications room with signal scrambling equipment designed to defeat standard law enforcement monitoring frequencies. A migrant smuggling transit network operating through agricultural transport routes in southern Miami-Dade is intercepted mid-operation. 3 vehicles, 41 individuals. The drivers, carrying forged agricultural contractor credentials, are arrested on the scene. The vehicles are sealed for forensic processing. A hidden tunnel entrance is discovered beneath a storage warehouse near the Florida City Freight Corridor. The tunnel, extending approximately 300 meters, is reinforced with concrete and equipped with ventilation, lighting, and a small rail system for moving cargo. Federal engineers who inspect the structure estimate it took between 18 months and 2 years to construct. It was built while the warehouse above it was operating as a licensed freight brokerage. A luxury yacht registered to a Panamanian holding company and moored at a private marina in Key Biscayne is boarded by Coast Guard and DIA agents. Below decks, in a modified ballast compartment, agents find fentanyl. Pressed pills. Approximately 1.7 million doses staged for distribution. The amount is significant enough that federal health officials briefed on the seizure note it could have supplied street-level networks across the entire eastern seaboard for months. By the time the last target marker on the coordination map goes dark, federal agents have seized over 2 tons of narcotics combined, more than $80 million in cash and assets, arrested 61 individuals, and dismantled what the DIA field director will later describe as the most efficiently engineered narcotics and financial infrastructure we have encountered operating inside a single metropolitan region. The underworld took more damage in 6 hours than it had in 6 years. But the numbers, as staggering as they are not the most important thing investigators uncover during the operation. The most important thing they uncover is what the seized servers reveal about how deep the rot actually goes. The communications logs from Cruz's server farm, cross-referenced with financial transaction records and the second authorization key set linked to the regional architect, begin to paint a picture that senior investigators describe in closed briefings as a parallel enforcement architecture. Patrol schedules for 2 county-level law enforcement divisions had been systematically adjusted on nights when the Coastal Import Syndicate ran its largest shipments through the port corridor. The adjustments were minor enough to avoid triggering internal review. Reduced frequency on specific waterway patrol routes. Extended response zone assignments that pulled units away from key transit areas. On their own, each adjustment looks like routine scheduling. In aggregate, across 47 documented instances, they form a pattern that is unmistakable. The syndicate did not just avoid law enforcement, it moved law enforcement. 3 serving law enforcement officers are arrested in connection with the investigation. a senior patrol supervisor whose overtime approvals controlled staffing rotations in two of the most critical patrol zones, a Port Authority liaison officer who had access to inspection priority queues and had been selectively downgrading cargo review flags on specific vessel manifests, and a county-level narcotics intelligence analyst whose access to interagency tip databases meant that, for at least 2 years, certain confidential informant reports were reviewed by someone on the cartel's payroll before they reached federal investigators. For the agents who had worked those informant relationships, the revelation is devastating. A 20-year DEA veteran, speaking to supervisors after the arrests, says he had wondered for 3 years why certain operations felt like they arrived at empty rooms. He uses the word hollow. He says the operations felt hollow, like something had already moved by the time they got there. Now he knows why. The badge, senior federal prosecutors will later say publicly, will be rebuilt from the ground up. Every compromised system reviewed. Every corrupted process stripped and replaced. The investigation is not over. It has simply reached its most dangerous phase. As federal analysts reconstruct the full scope of what Ronaldo Cruz built over 11 years, the picture that emerges is not simply a drug network that used Miami as a hub. It is a network that used Miami as a permanent foundation. A fortress city engineered from the inside out to be resistant to disruption. The coastal import syndicate's Atlantic corridor, operating through Cruz's logistics architecture, was moving an estimated 4 to 6 tons of narcotics per month through South Florida at peak capacity. Shipping manifests routed through legitimate freight channels, altered at the documentation level by corrupted port liaisons. Cargo inspection windows scheduled around advance intelligence provided by compromised enforcement contacts. Financial proceeds laundered through a layered corporate system sophisticated enough that, as one federal financial crimes investigator puts it, if you only looked at any single company in isolation, every one of them looked perfectly legitimate. That was the design. Cruz did not just launder money. He built a financial ecosystem in which dirty money could circulate and clean itself continuously, generating legitimate returns, paying legitimate taxes, employing real people in real businesses, all while the core engine beneath it ran narcotics, processed cash, and moved human beings through smuggling corridors. The seized files contain architectural planning documents, not blueprints for buildings, strategic planning documents for the network itself, written in coded operational language that federal analysts spend weeks translating, that describe a long-range operational vision for the Florida corridor extending 15 years forward. Documents that describe the corridor not as a temporary route, but as a permanent installation. A headquarters, a base of operations designed to outlast any individual enforcement cycle by embedding itself too deeply into legitimate commerce and civic infrastructure to be cleanly separated from it. The system was not just infiltrated, it was redesigned. For the cartel's future, not just its present. The regional architect, whose identity investigators continue to pursue through the encrypted authorization keys, is described in internal syndicate documents as the guarantor of continuity. The person whose access to systems and schedules made the entire long-range plan viable. Federal prosecutors indicate in sealed court filings that identifying and arresting the regional architect remains the primary active objective of the investigation. What they already know is enough to confirm that what Cruz built was not simply organized crime operating in the shadow of legitimate society. It was a shadow government, sitting inside South Florida's financial and civic architecture, breathing through it, growing through it, and it had been there for 11 years before the ground beneath a stone patio in Miami Beach gave up its secrets. Here is what this costs. Not in dollars. Not in seized assets or court filings. In the 18 months before Operation Title Ledger's primary raids, overdose data from Miami-Dade and Broward counties recorded over 400 fentanyl-related deaths. Most of them involved pressed pills. Pills consistent in chemical profile with the synthetic narcotics found in the superlab in northwest Miami-Dade. Families who lost people to those overdoses were not told that the pills came from a facility operating behind a licensed freight company in a commercial zone. They were not told that the distribution network moving those pills had been protected, in part by patrol schedule adjustments made by a supervisor who cashed cartel payments through a ghost payroll service in Hialeah. There are neighborhoods in this story, real neighborhoods, where the drug economy is not an external invasion, but a local institution, because the external systems that were supposed to push back against it had been quietly hollowed out from within. There are families in this story. Parents who buried children. Children who grew up without parents. Human beings moved through sealed rooms and flooded corridors and refrigerated transport containers by a network that Cruz's documents refer to in the cold operational language of a logistics enterprise as the human asset supply chain. Power does not always need violence to hold a system. Sometimes it only needs silence. Patience. The right positions, the right schedules, the right access, and enough ambition to build something that looks, from the surface, exactly like the world it is consuming from the inside. That is what the Coastal Import Syndicate built in South Florida, and that is what Operation Tidal Ledger is, even now, still dismantling. The arrests continue. The encrypted files are still being processed. The regional architect has not yet been publicly identified. Ronaldo Cruz is in federal custody, his attorneys filing the first of what will be many motions, his bail denied on the grounds that the court has determined, based on sealed filings, that he represents an extraordinary flight risk given the resources available to him through channels that federal investigators have not yet fully mapped. $50 million buried in the ground was not his emergency exit. Federal investigators believe, based on the financial architecture they have reconstructed, that the buried cash was a contingency. A fraction of a contingency. A portion of a larger reserve designed to fund a disappearance that would have been so complete, so thoroughly prepared, that even the people looking for him might not have known where to start. He did not make it to the courtyard, and that, in the end, is what matters. If you watch this entire story and you believe that political infiltration and organized crime represent a genuine threat to institutions worth protecting, tap like so that more people find this story before they should know it. Comment the word exposed if you think the full scope of what was buried, both in the ground and in the systems around it, needs to be dragged fully into the light.